everyone. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 20th of August, 2025. I hope you guys are doing well today. It's kind of a wild day today because there's a lot going on in Texas, literally live as we are on the air. But we do have to talk about Trump's latest crazy attacks on U.S. history. And we've got a lot more to discuss in the context of upcoming elections for the 2026 cycle and a whole bunch of other things that have happened in the last 24 hours since we were here live. So I hope you're all doing well today. First things first, for our visually challenged viewers today, I'm wearing a black silk shirred top. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohegan Land. Okay, so many folks may not have followed all the reasons why last night on Blue Sky there was an eruption of conversation about how bad slavery was. And unfortunately, this whole thing originated from a post by Trump on Truth Social concerning the Smithsonian. Now, you all may know that part of the incursion of Trump's white supremacist ideology and those of his administration on what's happening inside the country has included ongoing rabid attacks on the truth of American history. The latest version of this is that the post that Trump put out essentially said that he was really pissed off about museums under the banner of the Smithsonian, which, by the way, includes the National Museum of African American History and Culture, focusing on, quote, how bad slavery was, and instead focusing on all the great things about America, and ended by calling us the hottest country in the world, and that our institutions and museums should represent that. So I had to start with this today because there's a couple of things we need to say about this. And those who were following this discourse last night on Blue Sky saw an enormous number of Black academics, public intellectuals, commentators jumping in on this, not only because it's outrageous, right? But also because no matter how bad we think slavery might have been based on what we've seen in museums and learned in American history courses, there is no question that whatever we imagine it to be was far, far, far worse. And one of the big challenges here is that if we are not actually learning the truth of American history, we are, in the emblematic phrase that we hear so often, doomed to repeat it. And so one of the things that I just wanted to remark upon here today, just as a starting point, is that there is an incredible need right now for people to wage the battle for the truth telling about American history and how we got here, not just at a national level. Of course, we should all defend the Smithsonian and their decision making, and it's outrageous that Trump would seek to alter the, installations and permanent exhibitions of museums under the banner of the Smithsonian. But we also have these individual battles to fight where we live. Because if we are not engaged in that kind of routine mobilization, protecting our school boards, protecting our local libraries, making sure that our local and state institutions of education are actually committed to telling the truth, that history and the lessons that we've learned from it will be lost, right? And I have to remind everybody that there is a very specific through line here, from slavery to slave patrols, to American policing, to the criminal industrial complex, to ICE and human detention in its current form. These things are all linked along a trajectory of American history. And one of the challenges now and for future generations is that if we're not aware of that history, if our institutions do not tell the truth of our history, those connections and that understanding will be lost. And that, by the way, makes it a lot harder to fight back. So I just want to urge everyone here, from the standpoint of where you sit, where you live, to please, I feel like I say this so often now, but please, if there's an open school board seat where you live, consider running for it. If there's an open seat on your library board, consider running for it. I actually looked at this myself in the town where I live just like a couple of months ago to find out when those terms were expiring. It's really important right now that we understand that the backstop for a lot of this stuff is actually us. And so when you see this at the national level, it may feel overwhelmingly hard to combat. I have more to say about that later on in the broadcast. But at the local level, there's an enormous amount that can be done. And even if you've never run for office before, or you don't really consider yourself to be the kind of person who likes to do public speaking, roles on school boards and roles in library boards and in other roles related to the regulation of curriculum actually are among the most critical backstops that we have right now. And we need people running for those seats. You know, one of the things that I find continuously shocking whenever I look into local elections on behalf of clients and also myself is how many seats go unopposed or how many seats sit empty on smaller boards that actually really have control over these kind of issues. So critically important to please consider doing that work. And even if you can't run for office, you should be showing up to meetings that are discussing issues like this, right? Like, get looped into your local library association, get looped into what's happening in your local school board, show up and speak at those events if you are able to do that, or show up to support people who are. Because again, these attacks are not accidental. He's not attacking the history of America and the institution of slavery and its trajectory through American history for the hell of it. It's not a distraction. He's doing this intentionally because he knows that the through line here leads directly to him sitting in the Oval Office. So please consider doing more there. While we're here, I do want to mention something to everybody here on our Patreon broadcast, which is that we are currently onboarding, for those of you who are change makers, folks into the fall entrance to the Ripple Effect Institute, which I haven't talked a lot about here, but I'm just going to take 1 second to talk about it now. Inside the Ripple Effect Institute, we're working with people who are committed to making a legacy level change for good, even in these really difficult times. It is an incredible cohort of people. It is a lifetime access community. And it's something where we are watching people who didn't feel like they had the skills, but really had the drive to make a difference, changing their whole communities in really significant ways, feeding people who are hungry, providing medical care and therapeutic services to marginalized people, making a difference in the context of the LGBTQ community and how they're advocating for youth. All sorts of things are happening in there with an incredible cohort of people. And so if you're interested in joining us, you can always apply for a free strategy call with our team. I've done the link below already in our show notes today. That call is no commitment, no stakes. It's really just to get on the phone and talk about what your intent is right now in terms of how to make a difference, what your perspective is on your capacity to do it, and whether or not the Ripple Effect Institute is right for you. We have a couple of our members. Hi, Laura. Hi, Jean. Already in the comments today. And they can attest to the fact that it's a complete game changer in terms of what it's allowing people to do. And the nationwide network of people working to really make the country better even now has been moving in the direction of accomplishing. So please consider booking a strategy call if you have any interest in that. Okay, we have to talk about what's happening in Texas right now because there is a just an incredible event going down right now in the Texas legislature. Okay, we talked yesterday about the detention of Representative Nicole Collier on the floor of the House, the state House in Texas. Today, the Texas Republicans are trying to once again pass the congressional maps that would give Texas an additional 5 Republican seats by gerrymandering the Texas map. I was watching this live right up until the minute where I came on the air. And I have to tell you that even in this day and age, it is still possible to be tremendously shocked by what is happening on the floor of a state legislature at events like this. I sat and watched for about 20 minutes before I got on the air here. A Republican representative attest to the fact that they consulted lawyers for the sole purpose of gerrymandering the Texas maps to increase the Republican likelihood to win. They are claiming in this context that they have done this by actually amplifying certain Latino-based districts. And they are claiming that so that they don't run afoul of prior Supreme Court precedent about the fact that racist gerrymandering is actually a constitutionally prohibited activity. Nonetheless, their actions right now are completely blunt. They are not hiding the fact that they have done all of this to try to throw the House of Representatives election in 2026 into the hands of a Republican majority, despite the fact that they are losing and their poll numbers are down everywhere. By the way, if you missed the polling yesterday, Trump in the last month is another 10 points underwater on immigration policy. It's just plummeting through the basement. So this is their attempt to gerrymander a map in order to make sure that no matter what we do on our side of the fence, it will be incredibly difficult for us to take back the House in 2026. Now, even if it passes, it will be challenged in court. There's no question about it. But nonetheless, one of the things that we need to be aware of is that, like, and I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to anybody in this audience, the gloves are completely off. They're not even pretending that they are doing this for a legitimate reason. They're not even pretending that they're doing it on the basis of some other positive or not prohibitive motive, right? They're literally out there on the floor of the House saying, we are doing this so Democrats lose. And that to me is just astonishing. Like, I didn't expect when I tuned in to listen to the debate this morning that they were actually going to full-throatedly admit that that's the purpose of what they're doing. It's very obvious if you're looking at the data and how it's been gerrymandered and what the maps represent. But nonetheless, it's terrible. And the Democrats are doing their best to call it out. Right before I came on the air, a Democratic Texas rep asked the question, why didn't you give us a majority Latino district in Dallas? If you're convinced that, you're redistricting this for, reasons having to do with like increasing racial representation in districting, you should have given us a Latino majority district in Dallas. Why didn't you do that? And that rep was like, oh, well, there's one in North Texas, right? Which is obviously far more conservative than deep blue Dallas, Texas, where they have not gerrymandered it for purposes of or fundamentally in the same way that they have gerrymandered the rest of the state. And that's because if they gerrymandered a majority Latino district in Dallas, that district would be blue. So all of this is shocking and astonishing. And please don't anybody drop into the mentions and tell me that it's not surprising, because I'm going to remind you all the capacity to still be shocked is a sign of our humanity. It looks, for all intents and purposes, like these maps are going to pass. I will just tell you all, as we discussed yesterday, that is going to trigger a series of dominoes in California and other blue states to attempt to redistrict those states in advance of the 2026 election. There is a bill already in California that has a trigger on it that if Texas gerrymanders its maps, California has permission to do the same. And I have to tell you, as I've said for weeks now here, my view on this is that California and other blue states should not just be gerrymandered to give us back those 5 seats that we otherwise would have had leaning in our favor, but in fact should be gerrymandered like to give us 20. Because if they can play dirty, so can we. And at this point, the idea that we need to stand on principle that nothing should be gerrymandered, as I discussed yesterday, is simply allowing them to win. This is a moment to fight fire with fire, and it's going to happen. So how this plays out through the standpoint of the next steps that are coming, which will include court challenges for constitutionality, which will include court challenges on the basis of racist gerrymandering somehow. We have yet to see how that's going to play out, but I am certain that there are lawsuits teed up for this. It's also going to trigger a whole series of actions in blue states to try to level the playing field or tip it in our direction. At this point, I'm not bothered by that. I really am not. I mean, the only way that Republicans can win at this point is by cheating. And we have an obligation on our side of the fence. Our leaders have an obligation to do everything within their power to push back against that, because they're literally trying to steal the 2026 election right now. That's what's happening in the Texas legislature as we speak. Okay, so that's Texas. Let's talk for a second about what's going on with the Fed this morning, because in case you didn't hear this, Trump has now threatened a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. I need to make something very clear. Trump and the executive branch generally have no authority to alter the makeup of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. No legal authority whatsoever. But what appears to have happened here is that Trump's nominee, he's now confirmed as the director of the FHFA, which is the Fair Housing Federal Authority. I think I'm probably mispronouncing that, who happens to be Bill Pulte of Pulte Homes. Okay. He is a massive Trump donor. I could say a lot more about him and his organization. I'm just going to set that aside to another day. He appears to be ginning up a scandal that may have no basis in fact, against a woman by the name of Lisa Cook, who, shocker, happens to be a Black woman on the board of governors for the Fed, claiming that she committed mortgage fraud. Okay. Again, all that has happened is that Pulte has called for an investigation into whether or not she committed mortgage fraud. There's no prosecution. There's no conviction. This is literally just like an allegation. that she's committed mortgage fraud, okay? And on that basis, he has given Trump now ammunition to call for Lisa Cook to be removed. Again, he has no authority to do this. One of the things that I need to remind everybody of here is that part of Trump's agenda is the entire overtaking and manipulation of the US economy. And again, one of our major backstops is the Fed, particularly the chairman of the Fed, who runs on a particular term and cannot be removed midterm by a president. An attempt to interfere with the Board of Governors is a similar effort to interfere with the decision-making about the Federal Reserve and thereby influence the US economy. Many of you will remember that Trump has been screaming for months now about the fact that Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, has not lowered interest rates, in part because part of his policy responsibility is to evaluate where inflation is, whether or not that is having an adverse impact on the US economy, what's happening in various metrics around economic indicators. And he's doing his job. And Trump doesn't like that because he wants interest rates to come down. And so again, and that's not to mention that Jerome Powell also humiliated Trump live on television a couple of weeks ago when Trump was attacking the cost to build a new building for the Fed. Long-standing feud by Trump against Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell seems unfazed by it, but it is what it is. This attempt to interfere with the Fed now, and again, I have to point out, yet again, he's attacking a Black woman, is an attempt to influence Jerome Powell's decision-making by altering the makeup of the board. So all of this in its own place is yet another indicator of the way in which this authoritarian takeover of federal backstops is part of the aim. So that is absolutely something to watch right now. Okay, I was asked to talk about a breaking news story this morning in the New York Times about Democratic voter registration data. And this piece essentially indicates, and again, I'm so suspicious of reporting like this in the New York Times, so everything that I'm about to say about this should be taken with a grain of salt. But it appears to indicate that Democratic voter registration has dropped dramatically between between 2020 and 2024, by as much as 30%. And there are those opining from the Cook Report and other ordinarily reliable sources that this has put Democrats underwater enough that it's a very deep hole to dig out of. On the Patreon feed, reminder, you can become a paid subscriber if you want to ask me questions. The question that was posed was like, what do we do about this? This seems like very doomy. So this brings us back to a really important discussion about 2026 and 2028. And one of the things that we need to consider here is, what is the position of the Democratic Party on issues that are critical to Americans? And I am just going to point out again that we have two models right now of Democratic candidates who are getting votes from every demographic across every single issue in ways that have, in some instances, taken votes away from Trumpian districts. And those two people are Omar Fatah, who is currently the Democratic nominee for the mayor of Minneapolis, and Zohran Mamdani, who is currently the Democratic nominee for the mayor of New York City. Both of them have run compelling campaigns on issues that really matter to individual people, right? They're not there saying, like, we can't do anything about this. Mamdani was out yesterday talking about the fact that a 6-year-old girl was kidnapped by ICE from her elementary school in Queens, and she and her mother were deported while her older sister is still in detention, and that is outrageous, and that the city should be taking action to stop it. This kind of messaging lands. It's a hell of a lot better than this kind of like mealy-mouthed, wishy-washy, we need border reform kind of stuff that we've seen Hakeem Jeffries do. And the Democratic Party approval ratings are lower right now than those of Republicans. And yet, if people would actually line up and learn something from the Mamdani campaign, from the Fatah campaign, from the campaigns of other Democratic Socialist candidates around the country, others on the left who are out there actually talking about making people's lives better, I think we would flip this voter registration data like overnight. And I have to say that I have kind of reached a point of disgust about this, because the answer to this stuff is so simple and so obvious, right? We know what's working. We know what's working in a Midwest city as well as an East Coast city, right? We know what's working in local and state elections when candidates show up to actually really fight the good fight. We're seeing those seats flip from red to blue. We're seeing people who voted historically, even for Trump, showing up to campaign for people like Mamdani. We know what the answer is. I don't know why it's so hard for the Democratic Party leadership to get it through their heads, but the answer to this is like simple. You have to give people something to vote for, not just something to vote against. And this is something that we've been talking about here on this broadcast since like all the way back in 2017. The messaging of the party needs to be lined up right now about what it can do to push back against ICE, because by the way, again, Trump is underwater completely in every demographic and every voter registration demographic on immigration policy. Nobody wants what he's doing. It's like upwards of 65% who disapprove of what he's doing, even in the Republican Party. So the data is there to back it up on top of everything else. And that's not including all the things in terms of social services. You know, you just have to look at this, like, who's opposed to free rides on public transit? Who's opposed to that? That makes working people's lives easier, right? Providing for people who are like hungry is something that pretty much everybody can get behind. So again, really critical at this point that we understand that the solutions are there. And the questions that we should be asking as Democrats, wherever we fall on the Democratic spectrum, is why is our leadership not taking the lesson? Because it's so obvious. Right? It's so obvious. And that's how that gets flipped. Like really, very clearly, we need the right candidates and we need the party behind those candidates, not attacking them. Like, you know, seeing kind of centrist Democrats backing up for Cuomo in the primary in New York was just astonishingly bad optics. Like the future is right here. Like we can see it. We know what the leadership of our party is going to look like. The idea that like old centrist Dems are clinging on by their fingernails, much like white supremacist Republicans, is really distressing. So, you know, for those who ask me what I thought of it, that's what I think about it. I think that we've got to get like progressive Democrats running for office on platforms that actually tell people what they're going to do to make their lives better. Again, like that's how we win. Is with compelling candidates who know how to reach voters and not through these like traditional means, but through things like TikTok and Instagram. I mean, Mamdani's just like an expert at this. So is Fata, by the way. They're like both really compelling figures, but they're talking to people where they live, right? They're not like out there, you know, doing kind of traditional means of campaigning. They're doing really compelling public street campaigning that's working. You know, 10,000 volunteers in Queens. It's amazing. And it's right there. And it should be the roadmap that the party should be following from here on out. Okay. Had a couple of questions. Oh, before I get to that, let me just say one other thing. In case you missed it, the District of Columbia is fighting back like nobody's business against ICE. I've pinned a couple of videos this morning on my Blue Sky feed, but ICE was literally run out of the Columbia Heights neighborhood of Northwest DC yesterday by a crowd of people who chased them down the street. Again, this is stuff that is not being covered by mainstream media right now. It's really important that people understand that there's actual people power in the streets right now that is successfully pushing ICE out of their neighborhoods. And again, this is a model that needs to be applied in other places because, again, I know that it doesn't look like this if you're doom scrolling all day long, but there are way more of us from the perspective of like opposing these racist, white supremacist secret police on our streets than there are of them. And when you have a crowd of 500 people chanting ICE go home in the face of 25 agents, they're going to leave. So it's really just very, very important that you're seeking out reliable media that actually is telling you the whole story of what's going on. Okay. A couple other questions that we had today. Much as I'm loath to talk about this, I'm actually going to answer this question from a sideways perspective. Someone asked me on the Patreon feed this morning about 2028 Democratic presidential candidates, and don't we need to start thinking about that early so that we get a long runway? I'm going to tell you, I think it's way too early for that right now. I think part of what needs to happen right now is a focus on, one, local community organizing. More on that in a second. Two, the 2026 midterms, if you're going to focus on an election cycle instead of doing like 24/7 organizing, by the way, I'm much more in favor of the latter than electoral cycle organizing because it alienates people. We should be focusing on 2026, not 2028. And the last thing that I'm going to say about this is that there's a lot of noise being made right now, as I said yesterday, that seeks to put certain individuals who happen to be very loud and vocal right now on a pedestal as appropriate 2028 candidates. We're a long way from that, right? And I have complaints that I have made very clear about some of those folks, including yesterday. So my view on this is that, if you're thinking about 2028, fine. But your energy right now is much better directed toward local community action to help save people's lives, to keep people safe, to make a difference where you live, because that's the thing that's going to leverage into 2026 voter turnout, and then will eventually leverage into 2028 voter turnout. All right. Like, the answer is not to start thinking about candidates now. The answer is to actually build communities of trust so that when the time comes to vote, you are a trusted source, and the people that you're working with have built community where others know that you're a trusted source, and that community is built in a shared leadership model where everybody is working together toward the same aims. So please get involved. Again, please get involved locally where you live. All right. Similarly, I was asked about Sherrod Brown. And this is a tough one for me because I really like his wife, Connie Schultz. She's just amazing. And we followed each other for a very long time on social media. Sherrod Brown made a bunch of mistakes that cost him his Senate seat in the last election. And as much as I think it's a good thing to have a Democrat running again in Ohio, who has previously been a senator and stands a chance of winning, he needs to stop listening to Democratic consultants and actually start listening to people. Because he took some positions in the last election that were really not favorable to the demographics that have backed him from the beginning. So my hope is that whatever the errors were that were made there have been learned from. Okay. Similarly, I was asked about postcarding. So those of you who have been here for the last 8.5 years know that I have had various views on postcarding over time, most of them having to do with the effectivity of the U.S. Postal Service and whether or not a postcard itself is actually going to get people to vote who otherwise wouldn't have voted. There's been a fair amount of data and research done on this. Postcarding is not the most effective way to get people out to vote, but it doesn't hurt, okay? And I know there are people who are concerned about reaching people through other means and that postcarding is more direct and have successfully run postcarding parties in the past. And I don't want to dissuade you from doing any of that. I do just want to say that as far as local elections go, because I'm assuming the postcarding right now is for local elections, we're talking about governor's races, Spanberger or Mikey Sherrill here in New Jersey, some of the bigger gubernatorial races that are underway right now. My viewpoint on this is always that face-to-face contact is the most effective way. And the data shows that, right? It shows that those interpersonal one-on-one conversations, particularly in relationships of trust, are the ones that are more likely to sway voter turnout. Now, back when I lived in California and I was in Katie Porter's district, I used to get postcards in the mail all the time. And it was really nice to get them. I'm not going to say it wasn't nice, but I will also just tell you that I don't think it swayed a single vote in my neighborhood. I think people who were already committed voted for Katie, and people who weren't did not. And so to me, again, I'm not going to dissuade you from doing it. I'm just going to tell you that I think there are more effective means. And I think that critically, one of the things that we can't neglect in this era is that with so much disinformation circulating online and so much overwhelm in the news cycle, the interpersonal community relationships that we build are the most important factor in voter turnout going forward than anything else. Okay. So again, local organizing. I feel like I'm beating this drum. So, okay. Final thing today was a question that clearly came from somebody on the Patreon feed who was really in a state of overwhelm, right? All these terrible things are happening. The backstops are failing. That's true. The things that we thought he couldn't do legally, he's doing anyway. Also true. Institutions are failing. Very true. The DOJ is completely compromised. Absolutely. This can all feel well, what can we do about it? All right. So here's the really kind of hard truth about all of this. There are certain things that we have the capacity to alter right now and certain things that we don't. Okay. We can't reclaim the structure of the DOJ as long as Trump is the president. Okay. That is not going to happen. And battles are being fought in court every day and being won in the vast majority of cases. Lawyers are doing incredibly good work in that regard. But if you yourself are wondering, how do we get the DOJ back? The bad news I have for you is that that's not going to happen until there's another president in office who is not a fascist. Okay. And nonetheless, like the flip side of this coin, which is really important, is that there are lots of things that you as an individual and your community can do that will alter the landscape of what the DOJ is able to do successfully, or ICE is able to do successfully, or RFK Jr. is able to do successfully. All right. And part of this is about figuring out how you can use your immediate power where you live to make a difference. And again, this is one of the things that we talk about in the Ripple Effect Institute all the time. But the key here is understanding that your local community work is not lonely. Okay. And I mean that in a really serious way. Your local community work, if you look at it from a 30,000 foot level, is part of an incredible network of local community organizers around the country, all of whom are on the same page. Again, not to toot our own horn, but this is one of the things that's amazing about the Ripple Effect Institute is that we have people in like New Jersey and people in Arizona and people in California and people in Portland, Oregon and people in Florida who work for Planned Parenthood and people in Texas and people in Chicago, all of whom are doing these incredible things, and we're all in community with each other, okay? This is exactly the way in which we need to look at the lens of our own local community organizing, period. Because trusted relationships in local community organizing are part of the solution, because all of us are hubs on a wheel. And we have no idea like when the tipping point is going to come that is going to change the trajectory of American history, because literally everybody is working together, doing everything they can where they live. You have to get past the kind of like blur of nationwide takeover of institutions and start thinking about what you can do right now where you live. Can you go pick up prescriptions for someone who is undocumented in your community who's afraid to go to the pharmacy? Can you get their groceries, right? Can you be the person in your neighborhood who is the trusted parent of LGBTQ kids, or ally for LGBTQ kids, where those kids can come to your home when they're scared? Can you be the person who makes sure that people who are falling through the social safety net have food and housing? Can you take a little step where you live that makes a difference in somebody's life, and can you do it in community with other people? Because the way we fight back is not like some massive publicized movement, okay? And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of national organizations right now that are trying to do that, okay? But you have to understand that part of the issue in this era is the fact that we are all constantly under surveillance, all right? And actually, the most effective actions right now are the ones that are not being seen, right? They're the ones where people are working behind the scenes to save people's lives. And that doesn't mean that the work isn't happening everywhere. It doesn't mean that that work isn't interconnected. It doesn't mean that your own network, which I will guarantee for many of you spans states, if not the entire nation, doesn't have the capacity to mobilize at a critical moment to try to make a difference in the context of this regime. It does mean, though, that you have to take yourself out of the overwhelm and the flood of like, oh my God, everything's collapsing, into the very narrow, unsexy focus of what can I do today that's going to make a difference? And you have to trust that that's happening everywhere else in the country, and that when the moment comes, when there's a need for mass mobilization, or when something that we can't predict happens that changes the entire trajectory of where we are, that we will all connected together be able to rise and take whatever action is necessary. That's the answer. Okay. The answer, again, I said this yesterday, but it's worth repeating. The answer is not to wait for another charismatic leader to rise. The answer is not to say, like, where are the leaders who are supposed to be leading us out of this? They're you, they're us, they're all of us together, right? This is the critical means by which we turn the tide of history. And, again, you have to trust that the power of the people lies with us, and that it is, once it's organized, far more powerful than they will ever be. Like, I can guarantee it. Look at the ways in which history has changed in this country. It didn't change because, radically one day some Democratic leader stood up and said, we're going to eliminate, voter suppression for Black Americans. No, it rose from churches and from communities and from individuals getting together and saying, like, I refuse. I just simply refuse at this moment to comply. I'm going to do whatever I can within my power to make a difference. I'm going to put my body on the line if I have the capacity to do that. And if I can't do that, I'm going to work behind the scenes to make sure my neighbors are safe and fed. Like, this is the answer. So the difficulty with this, I will just say again, because I've had so many conversations with high-level organizers about this over the last couple of weeks, including when I was on vacation, is that there is a romanticized idea, thanks to film and television of what resistance or what civil rights movements or what dramatic revolutionary action looks like, okay? Here's what it looks like in reality. It looks like doing the work to make people's lives better. That's it. Taking the next best step in furtherance of justice, taking the next best step in furtherance of freedom, getting involved in the day-to-day actions of organizations that are trying to make the world better every single chance you get. That's what it looks like. It's not some like highly romanticized dramatic revolutionary thing, okay? It's literally deciding that you are not willing to be complicit and then taking the next best action that works in the opposite direction. That's it. That's it. And trusting the fact that at the moment when things shift, because nobody can predict what that's going to be, all of us will be in it together. So that's my little rant for today. I'm going to remind you all that if you are not engaged yet and you need to know how to do it, you can download our free guide on how to make a difference right now. That's also linked below in the show notes. Again, I will also remind you that if you want a free strategy call about how you can make a legacy level difference right now, you can book a free call with our staff through the link that's also linked in the show notes. And lastly, if you like what we're doing here, and I hope you do, please consider becoming a paid subscriber over on patreon.com/resistancelive. That helps to keep this broadcast afloat. It helps to pay all my staff behind the scenes. A little bit of an announcement here. I hope you're all still tuned in because this is really important. We're also coming back as a podcast. So many of you will remember that 6 years ago, we live streamed. Our live streams actually showed up on podcasts as well. We took that away during the pandemic for a variety of reasons. We will be back in a RSS feed format on Spotify, which also allows us to air video, on Apple Podcasts, Apple iTunes rather, and on every place where you listen to podcasts sometime in the next couple of weeks. We're working on that behind the scenes, and my team is on that right now. So in addition to being live here on YouTube, which is not going anywhere because people always ask me that, we will also be feeding out our audio and in some instances our video onto other platforms so that it's more accessible to those of you who prefer to listen in that format. All right. So please like this broadcast. Give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Join us over on Patreon, which is where the RSS feed will be originating. Patreon.com/resistancelive. And I will catch you all back here live tomorrow. All right, my friends. Thank you so much for being here. And I will see you regular time for the rest of the week. All right. Bye.